morning. It's Tuesday, May 2nd. And yesterday was obviously May 1st. And when I was a kid growing up, we celebrated May 1st. And May 1st is a very popular holiday all around the world. Because May 1st represents a holiday for the workers, a tribute to those who work. Unions, many unions had May Day as a holiday. And I can tell you that when I was a kid, I celebrated May Day every year by going to a parade that ended in Union Square in New York. And my older brother, carried banners that indicated who we were and what we were doing and which union we belonged to, because we were a staunch union family. But a May Day in the United States has seemed to have disappeared. But meanwhile, in countries around the world, it is still a major event. In fact, it's extremely important in many nations that are not democratic. For instance, China has a major celebration on May Day, and so do many other countries of the communist persuasion have big celebrations on May Days to honor their workers. So while the U.S. doesn't formally recognize the 1st of May as a national holiday, or any holiday of any kind, you may find some communities that have festivals dedicated to youth, spring and flowers and things like that associated with nature and the coming of the springtime. But that's not what May Day was about when I was a kid. And maybe it really was happening that way all around the country, but I never recognized it. To me, it was a union thing. You had to go out and celebrate the fact that you were a union member and you marched, right? So this holiday, that's what happens in other countries, in Latin America and other places like that. But it's interesting that to honor the Chicago workers, the International Socialist Conference in 1889 named May Day a labor holiday. And that was the start of what many countries now call International Workers' Day. So the U.S. had a part in building and creating this international holiday, but from what I can see lately, it has fallen by the wayside. Now, May Day was not considered very important. In fact, it was looked down upon and disparaged by the Puritans. That's right, the Puritans. They considered the celebrations of May Day to be the pagan holiday. So they forbade its observance. And so the springtime holiday never became an important part of the American culture because of the Puritan view. And remember, we're going back to the late 1800s, when the Puritans probably had a lot more say in what was going on around this country. So May Day never became an important feature in our country, certainly not as important as it was in many European countries. I think it's a shame because I think we should celebrate the fact that we have many people work and that workers are important. I think it was a great celebration. And it's too bad it's ended in the United States. But it hasn't ended around the world. It's very, very popular still in many countries. And I'll tell you one thing that hasn't ended about May Day, and this is a universal distress call that is used all over the world. And it was created in 1920 because we needed a simple way to indicate that a flying plane was in trouble. And it couldn't be a long-winded expression. So they came up with the words May Day. And it was a gentleman named Frederick Stanley Mockford. See, I had something to do with that, you understand. Who was the officer in charge of radio at the Croydon Airport in England. And he had been asked to think of a word that would indicate distress and would be easily understood by all pilots and all ground staff if there was an emergency. So he came up with May Day. And I am proud to say that he has the name Stanley. And I'm also proud to say that I was born in the month of May. So there you have it. I have a love of May. But of course there are things that are going on in this country in the month of May that are not very good, because we had another major bank failure. JP Morgan Chase is buying most of the asset of the First Republic Bank, and that is a deal that was announced yesterday. After the First Republic Bank became the third bank in the U.S. to fail since March. What is going on? Have the banks forgot how to operate? Have they all put themselves in jeopardy for some reason or other? So JP Morgan said it acquired a substantial majority of the assets and assumed the deposits, the insured deposits and the uninsured deposits of First Republic. And they got all of that from the FDIC, and they're protecting a huge amount of depositors. So the FDIC is doing its job. It's attempting to prop up consumer confidence in the banking system, because we have watched three major banks fail in the last 6 weeks or so. And I am sure that we will hear the truth about why these banks are failing. And I believe part of the problem lies with the previous administration, and that we have to reinstate the rules that were rolled back by that administration for banks with assets between $100 and $250 billion. And those rules included liquidity requirements and enhanced liquidity stress testing. That meant you have to watch everything you're doing, right? Liquidity rules were created by the Dodd-Frank Act and required banks to hold sufficient high-quality liquid assets to cover expected outflow in a stress period. And we've been in a stress period now. So while Donald Trump made these loosenings when he first took office, it's time for our government, our wonderful Republican government, to tighten the reins again. It's time to do some things. There ought to be supervisory capital stress tests that occur every year to make sure that these banks are doing their job. And they ought to bring back the living will, which made banks and bank holding companies of a certain size submit plans describing how they could be wound down without transmitting stress to the rest of the banking system. Protective measures that was removed by the Trump administration. So there are several things that have happened in the banking world that we can lay on the foot of our former president. But I don't want to do that now. I just want you to recognize the fact. So I leave you at that this morning. The beginning of a great month, May.